There we go. That's better. Let's try that again. Good morning, brethren.
Good morning.
It is good to see you all this morning. And we are going to be taking the next hour and going through several questions that were submitted by the brethren based on yesterday's discourses. I want to, as we just get settled in and get started, set down just the objective here. We want to give scriptural answers to the questions, and as we do that, we are likely going to have, because these are prophetic issues, some differences of opinion on things. And the object here, brethren, is to not highlight and accentuate differences of opinion, but it will be to accept and respect differences of opinion from a scriptural perspective. And so if there are things that one of the brothers says, well, I see it this way, another brother says, I see it that way, we're not going to go back and forth and have them debate till somebody wins. What we are going to do is we're going to make it a brief summary and turn it back to you, brethren, and say, this is for personal study. Because prophetic understanding is not something that is necessarily going to be easy. And we know very, very, very plainly and clearly that when, at the return of our Lord in 1874, and the ministry and the work of Brother Russell, and the immensity of what he did and what he put in place, he had expectations that just took a lot longer than he would have anticipated. And when you realize that, we have to understand, if Brother Russell couldn't pin down looking at the future and the exact unfolding of things in time frames, we better be careful ourselves, because we want to make sure that we are approaching these subjects with great humility. And there are questions that are unanswered, and will be answered as they unfold, and likely in some aspects of prophecy, every one of us will look up and say, wow, I didn't see that piece coming. And that's a good thing. We do want to be aware of what's coming as best as we can, and approach our prophetic studies ideally from the perspective of let us reason together, and that was mentioned yesterday. So we have several questions. We'll see how far we get. I think I want to start with one of the questions that was talked about by a few of the brethren yesterday, and it's an important question especially in terms of current events. The question is, considering Ezekiel 38:11, has this already happened in Israel, or is it still future? Well, let me read Ezekiel 38:10 through 12, and then we will ask the brethren, and this is in relation to unwalled villages. Thus says the Lord God, this is Ezekiel 38:10 through 12, I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible. Thus says the Lord God, it will come about on that day that the thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil plan. And you will say, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. I will against those who are at rest, that live securely, all of them living without walls and having no bars or gates, to capture spoil, to seize plunder, to turn your hand against the waste places which are now inhabited, against the people who are gathered from the nations, who have acquired cattle and goods, who live at the center of the world. So the question is, specifically on verse 10, this going against the land of unwalled villages. Brethren, has this happened? Is it happening? Will it happen? What are your thoughts? Brother Harry.
Oh, right. I was looking for a mic.
You are mic'd
I guess
up,
I am
brother.
the mic. Okay.
You are mic'd up.
Well, this is, I've had this question, so I guess my answer is going to be part of it. It's going to be another question. But when I look at this, unwalled villages dwelling without bars and gates and dwelling safely without walls, I have looked at this in the past as saying, okay, walls, that sounds like a government. Is there a time when they were safe without a government? Well, there was the Palestinian protectorate that Great Britain, they were supposed to be protecting things, giving safety, etc., but there was no government. Israel was not a nation. So that's, that's something I have considered. But, when Brother Russell's talking about this, he's talking about a final feature in the land. Well, they were in the land at that time, but he was talking about a final feature. But some of the other things about dwelling safely means confidently. Without walls, I haven't seen any. Well, I've talked to some brethren about this, and I haven't gotten a real satisfying answer. Without walls or bars or gates. Well, that sounds like, some might say, I think some this weekend, well, the towns that they don't have walls all around them, but walls were necessary back in when Israel was in the land before, if you go back in the Old Testament times, that type of thing. So, but this seems to be the attitude of ones who want to come and plunder them because they've gotten goods and cattle and wealth. I mean, they have gotten goods and cattle and wealth. I mean, if you take the modern equivalent of those things. And there are those who if you look at the Ottoman Empire and the Arabs and whatnot, they really did nothing with the land for centuries and centuries. And a lot of that culture is nomadic. I mean, you go to where you find wealth, you take it, and then you leave, and you go somewhere else. Whereas Israel, it was God said, "This is your land. You have to make something of it." So that was their heritage from when they first came into the land, and that's what they've been wanting to do, even though they couldn't be parts of guilds, they couldn't own land, a lot of things they couldn't do in Europe. But finally, they come back to the land; they can actually make something of it. And now others are looking at the wealth that they have created, and they say, "Let's take that. Let's take that." And that has happened several times. Even in 205, when Israel withdrew from Gaza, they left all this infrastructure. They left wealth there, and they really did nothing. Those in Gaza did nothing with it. Has this completely been fulfilled? I don't think so, because when you get down to the bottom, where Ezekiel 38:23, "Thus I will sanctify myself." I will magnify myself and sanctify myself. And it's really in the defeat of the ultimate defeat of these enemies. So I think this is a principle that we've seen many times. When folks don't want to create wealth themselves, they get envious of those who do. And they say, well, let's just go, that's what thieves do. I mean, let's face it, that's what a thief is. For the most part. There's some folks who are just desperate, but there's some folks who just say, I'm not going to work myself, I'm going to go take it from somebody else. And that's kind of what is going on here. But God, I think it's interesting that God has put hooks in the jaws in verse 4, I'm going to put hooks into thy jaws, bring them against Israel, because Israel has to see I'm fighting these battles. And so as the mediatorial phase is going to be beginning, will the ancient worthies be there? Perhaps. I think that would be very reasonable, because that would be...
We might get to a question on that.
Okay, because they should, not only should they see God as fighting the battles, but they should see who the ancient worthies are. So I'll stop there.
Okay, so you're looking at this, if I'm understanding, and saying that you think that there's a sort of a partial fulfillment, but definitely something to come.
Yeah.
Okay. Brother David or Brother Bob? Brother David?
Of course, in Ezekiel 38, you have the description of the attack of Gog, of Magog, the nations being gathered, coming in. And these verses describe what appears to be the motivation for it. That you look defenseless. This is my time. I'm going to come down and do it. And So the question is, what does a defenseless Israel look like? Right now, they're hardly defenseless, although if you go back to October 6th, the Hamas came over and executed a lot of the things that we read here. I'm not suggesting that this is a fulfillment of it, but I'm saying that there's an interesting parallel. So going back to the question, what constitutes a defenseless Israel? I think there's two ways.
When you say that, I just want to interject because it talks about land of unwalled villages against those who are at rest that live securely. So when you say defenseless, it's in the context of living securely?
Yeah, well, there's two ways of looking at it.
Okay, well, that's what I'm
The second way attacks this idea of securely.
Okay,
So I'll come to that. So I'm giving basically, Rick, two different possibilities.
Gotcha.
Let's talk about the military, the actual coming down and whatnot. It has been suggested that there will be a compromise on the part of Israel where they give up some of their defensive ability for peace. Now, I'm not saying that they would be willing to do that, but this idea comes from Ezekiel 39, the next chapter, verse 26, and it references this particular condition or time. Ezekiel 39:26 says, "And they shall bear their shame." When you read that, you say, all right, somebody messed up and there's something coming of it. "And all their trespasses wherewith they have transgressed against me, when they shall dwell securely in their land, and none shall make them afraid." So what this verse may be saying is that there comes a time when they're dwelling securely and they're doing it in a way that God does not approve. That would be a case if Israel gave up some of its defensive capabilities, let's say turning it over to the United Nations or something, for peace. Don't worry, we'll guarantee it. We won't allow October 6th and whatnot. And then popular pressure, and I might say faithless pressure, would say, yeah, let's do that. So this shame and these trespasses are committed when they're dwelling securely in the land. And that may be one explanation. Another explanation is, and we're going to focus on the word securely here, is that they are dwelling securely and are resting in faith. They say, I don't need a wall because Jehovah will be our wall. And we have a text for that. Zechariah chapter 2, verse 5. "For I, saith Jehovah, will be unto her a wall of fire round about, and I will be the glory in the midst of her." So in this alternative possibility is that they're unwalled, they're resting, they're securely, is a resting in faith. Satan could see that too. Say, oh, they're good faith, well, I'll show them, and come down. So two possibilities here. One having to do just with a mental attitude that exposes them in Satan's thinking to an attack. The other case, in an actual case where they're laying down some of their military, which would open it up.
Okay, now in both cases, you're looking at it future.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure I understand.
Yep.
Brother Bob.
This is an interesting one because, of course, I think with prophecy, sometimes we see ripples. So you throw a stone in. So we might see things that have multiple applications. My take on this would be this is yet future, and it's a precursor to Ezekiel 39. But it's a setup. It gives the motive. I think as Brother David said. It sets up the motive, and the Lord said this is an evil thought to come down and take a spoil.
Right.
It really sets the scene for the evil forces versus God coming up against each other. So it's the precursor. It's the preface before you get to Ezekiel 39 when we see the real battle taking on. But the players are identified there. Sheba and Dedan are identified there in the merchants. And we think those are the Western nations and perhaps North America as well. And they're questioning, am I come down to take a spoil? I find this interesting because they're not in a defensive posture to try to intervene. So in my way of thinking, there may be a situation where they're unable to come in to their defense. We could see this, and I've heard it expressed, we could see a time in the future when the United States is not able to come in due to whatever circumstances. Now, we could conjecture as to what those circumstances would be. I'm not going to do that because, early on in the early 2000s, I was preparing a talk on brethren's thoughts on what's going to happen with Israel. And I went back. We had George Tabak. We had, scholarly brethren, and they all gave their thoughts in the early 90s, and none of them were correct. It was unanimous. I mean, there wasn't. And the reason was we can't predict what's going to happen in the future. We can't do that. God knows the end from the beginning, so he knows with certainty what's going to happen. Hezbollah just attacked Israel last night. I don't know if you turned on the news this morning. Massive missile attacks deep into Israel. So who can predict? None of us. I'll leave it at that.
So again, you see this as generally a future application of however it unfolds. And so, brethren, we're saying, it's in the scriptures. And we have a sense on what it might be, and we're going to leave it at that. All right, and that's good. And this is important. And brethren, this is important because with all that's going on, and I don't have to tell you, but we are living in times where literally every day can bring another ripple of the unfolding of this or that prophecy and the moving forward of the end of this age, once and for all for good. And so we do want to pay attention, but we want to pay attention from the perspective of wanting to understand and being willing to look at and say, okay, that's a little different than I thought. Let me see again how the scriptures read. So thank you, brethren, for that. That was a kind of a tough question, and it's okay to not know. It's okay to not be thoroughly convinced because it's something future that it seems odd the way it's written, and we know that the symbolisms the Lord has entirely in hand. Let's go to a different perspective on things, still very, very prophetic. Considering, and this is the question, considering the picture of Elijah and Elisha. Several of the brethren mentioned Elijah and Elisha yesterday. 3 points to the question. Has the Jordan been smitten? What does the Jordan picture? Have they crossed over already, or is that still future? So let me just read 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 7 through 10, and we will get the perspectives of the brethren on that and see what we see. 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 7 through 10. Now 50 men of the sons of the prophets went and stood opposite them at a distance, while 2 of them stood by the Jordan. Elijah took his mantle and folded it together and struck the waters, and they were divided here and there, so that the 2 of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed over, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you." And Elisha said, "Please let a double portion of your spirit be upon me." He said, "You have asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if not, it shall not be so." We'll pause there because the question is specifically about the smiting of the Jordan. So, brethren, the question in its 3 parts, and if we can be as relatively concise, I know I'm asking a lot, but relatively concise on these 3 pieces. Has it been smitten? What does it picture? And in your understanding of Scripture and prophecy, have they crossed over already, or is this still future? All right, who'd like to go first on this one? I'm not calling on anybody, just so you guys know.
Well, we can, I'll just put it out there, okay?
Okay.
Well, there was a reprint 5845, that's 5845. There's a heading, what smiting of the waters may mean. It says, it says, did the times of the Gentiles end by October 1st, 1914? It says, Brother Russell says, it certainly looks very much as if it did. The great nations of the world there began to go into pieces under the terrible shaking process that began. And he's relating this to the end of the Gentile times. that's what Jordan was picturing. But the Elisha and Elisha went beyond that, and we see the church state. I mean, I loved to see all those crowns rolling that you showed yesterday. That was impressive. That was really impressive. So, but that's what the world was. That's what the world was. That's what the European picture was. There's the divine right of kings, etc. That is gone. The church, great company, still here. So, let's say that's what it's picturing, and they're walking on together. So the smiting of the Jordan. And, Brother David Duran gave an interesting talk up in Detroit, I think the Metro, and he said, well, why did the chicken cross the road to get to the other side? Why did they smite Jordan? Well, it's not so much about, what is all this picture, but they wanted to get to the other side. But the smiting of Jordan, I mean, I think that's a very reasonable reference. So I'll stop there.
Okay, but can I ask you, so has the Jordan been smitten?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what does specifically? I just didn't gather. I'm going by the question. What is the Jordan picture?
It's picturing the Gentile time.
The Gentile time.
So
okay.
The church state system,
make sure we're clear.
And that's gone.
Okay.
That is gone.
So the Gentile times have ended. The kings have had their day.
Right.
You're on the other side.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's because it's Brother Russell's relating this to a period of time. He's specifically relating it to the ending of a period of time, at least in this reference, which seems reasonable to me.
Okay, good. And that was reprint 5845.
5845.
Yes. Very good. Okay, that gives us a perspective. Brother Bob or Brother David? Brother Bob?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this one. I'm not an authority on this, but what we see is this is a process. I agree with Brother Harry. I think this has occurred, and what we notice is that Elijah and Elisha go across together. And so what we're seeing here is a picture of the continuing. Now we've got, and I think Elijah represents the church and Elisha, the great company. They're continuing along, and that gives us a little clue as to the time frame as well.
Okay, so you're looking at that and saying, yes, done, church and great company beyond the end of the Gentile times. Okay, Brother David.
There's a couple of different ways to look at this. Let me just pull up here my notes. Waters can be a symbol of either people or truth. And we don't think that this represents Elijah class smiting the truth. Therefore, one of the other possibility is that it represents peoples, and that the smiting would be some type of message or activity that the church participates in, by virtue of the mantle, the authority that they have, which causes disruptions. That's kind of the standard. Many brethren hold that view that and this would make it future, by the way, that they're looking for some work that we could do. Now, the Bible student movement's pretty small, so you wonder what kind of work could we, as a small group of the Lord's people, do that would affect events, political, social, religious, financial events in the future. I don't know the answer to that. So that's one possibility. Again, I would place both the second possibility I'm going to talk about in the future as well. The second possibility is that it simply represents a judgment being passed. Remember, Jordan means to judge down. Mm-hmm. And you have one crossing, one judgment, and then Elisha comes back in another crossing. I like the idea that this represents a future time when the high calling has ended, that the identity of the Spirit-begotten church on this side of the veil is now known and fixed, as is the identity of the great company. That's the judgment. At that point forward, before that, who actually was part of the Elisha class, who was part of the Elijah class, had not been announced. At least it didn't go beyond the mind of God, the judgment of God. After this now, it is known. Here is the church. Here's the final thing that they have to do. Here's the great company, the final thing that they have to do. to be consistent, you have to say, well, when Elisha comes back, there has to be a judgment in identifying as well. And I like the idea that when Elisha comes back after Elijah is taken, he comes to it, smites the river. What would that represent? I like the idea that it represents the time where the Elisha class, now representing the great company, changes, and afterward represents the ancient worthies. In both cases, you have a judgment that results in identification.
So looking at it future.
Future.
Okay.
Yes.
And in that future perspective, there is some kind of significant judgment. Just it's hard to figure what that would be.
Yeah. It's sort of intangible. I mean, it's a judgment from God's standpoint, but it is a fixed time where a certain decision has been made, and it marks a point in time when that happens.
Okay. All right. Any other comments from the brother? Yes, Brother Harry?
Yeah, just to, not to go, I'm not going back and forth, but reprint 5772, just so the brethren have that. 5772 is another nice reference.
Okay.
So.
All right. So we are definitively undecided.
Yeah.
Yes, Brother David?
Yeah, Brother Rick, I have a study on Elijah and Elisha, and at the conclusion of the study, I have probably a couple of dozen reprint articles where Brother Russell comments on questions like, who do Elijah and Elisha represent? A couple of reprint articles. What does he say about the sons of the prophets? The mantle of Elijah. What is the school of the prophets? What do the sons of the prophets see of Elijah's departure? What do the three cities represent? The reprint that Brother Harry mentioned is in here as well. Mm-hmm. Again, if anyone would like that study, just email me and I can send it back to you.
All right. And, brother, in any case, be it past or future, one of the lessons here, and you'll figure this out very quickly, I'm a fanatic on this, is, well, what about me? What am I supposed to do with this? Okay, well, we don't agree. Now what? Now what we do is we study. And we look around and we say, how am I going to fulfill what the Lord is requiring of me today? And we ask questions of brethren who not only agree with us, but disagree with us, so that we can have a conversation, a holy conversation, to say, let's move further and let's appreciate one another's perspective and see the value of the other side. And I may not agree with it, but at least we can see the value of that. Brother David.
Yeah. And Brother Rick, in harmony with that, remember, prophecy is given to us primarily not to say, oh, this is going to happen, that's going to happen.
Right.
It's built, it's intended to build our hope when we see what has happened. And it is wonderful that we can, as brethren, talk about these things and come up with different ideas about what they may or may not mean. Because it is in our mind now. We're thinking about these things. So when the actual development happens, at least during the time we're still on this side of the veil, we say, oh, that's it. There's no question. We've been looking at this for years, and it either is what I expected or it's not, but that's it. So that's the value of discussing these prophetic means. We don't need to get married to any particular interpretation, but we're thinking about it. All the brethren are thinking about it. And when the reality comes, there'll be no doubt in our minds.
Yeah, and there's likely to be a lot of surprise as well.
I believe.
Yes, Brother Harry.
Yeah, just kind of echo that. We mentioned during the testimony meeting this reprint Peace of God. I think brethren are very familiar with that. The guy was completely confident in his ability to take care of everything within his vast domain. And to bring his plan to fruition, and a blessing of all the families of the earth, and everything that would be full reconciliation after the little season, etc. He knows it's going to be just no problem. But I think prophecy is, he could have just said, well, it's going to be okay, take my word for it. But he didn't do that. He said, I want you to see what I am doing. Now, and many times he would reveal only tiny bits of what he was going to do. But I think prophecy, it's like, well, will I have from Abraham that which I do? And that's, if we're the ones he really loves, he's trying to reveal things to us. But he doesn't just put it on a silver, truth is silver. But he says, I'd like you to do some work for this.
Right.
If you really check it out, work for it, and you will see things taking place. And there are many, many things we have seen, and they happened right on time. So I think it's prophecy is in a. I look at the Great Pyramid as a love letter from God to mankind. We get to read it ahead of time. I think prophecy is kind of like a love letter to the church.
That's a beautiful thought. Thank you. Okay, so that was fun. Let's go and do another one that there's likely to be differences of opinion. Another question that came from the brethren is the binding of Satan in process or still yet future? So Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 to 3. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding the key of the abyss and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who was the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the abyss, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he would not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were completed. After these things, he must be released for a short time. So, the binding of Satan in process, done, or yet future. Brother Bob.
Well, this is, of course, always a hot button for the brethren. So we could actually ask you to raise your hand. Is it past, a process, present, or future? Now, I'm not going to do that because some of you
That's
might not
good.
want
I'm
to
glad
raise
you're
your
not.
hands.
I'm glad you're not.
We're going to have to raise our hands here because you've asked direct. As I pointed out in my part of the talk, the purpose of this binding is so that there is no deceit during the 1,000 years. We could ask, is the 1,000 years, has it started? Is it currently starting, or is it future? We're not going to ask that question either. But the purpose is so there is no untruth, no deceit, because, during the kingdom, and I went through all those restitution blessings, they're all about if only. If only I had had a perfect body. If only I had had perfect nutrition. If only I felt not afraid. All of those if-onlys are removed to provide for perfect condition to learn righteousness. That's the purpose. That's the purpose of binding Satan. So I'll say it again, I think this question, whether it's started or will start, is irrelevant. It's during the kingdom when it's fully established so that there is no deceit.
So you're
I'm
essentially...
not going to say. I could say.
That's what I thought you were saying. Okay.
I mean, I can give you the reasons I think one way or another if you want those. Do you want those reasons?
Well.
He said it's future.
Well, he's saying that the effects of the binding of Satan have that future.
Correct.
Future result of keeping deceit from the people.
Correct.
Okay. All right. We'll take that. And I'm going to put down my official log here that the effects are future. All right, brethren. Brother Harry.
Okay. Well, thank you for going first. That was good. Well, what the Satan's tool is ignorance, superstition, darkness, and no knowledge of God. That's what his tools are. So whenever we can see throughout history when some of that darkness and superstition was taken away, then the power of Satan is reduced. 1799, there's a big one. Hey, guess what? Pope has no power with God whatsoever. Oh. So, the dragon spewed out all this truth and was hoping on a backlash, but the earth soaked it up. And so that was part of reducing his power. Divine right of kings, they got rid of that. They realized, oh my word, there's no. Why is there something so special about this person that they're not even subject to the laws of man, only to God? And who could possibly enforce that? Well, they realize that's wrong. That's just wrong. So there's who's bound a little more. But the binding is a process. And every time mankind is enlightened about the proper rights, privileges, and especially about knowledge of God, which is rare nowadays. But whenever that happens, Satan is being bound more and more. But I think Satan and the fallen angels are desperate. And there are all sorts of crazy things going on, trying to get more power. I was supposedly an educator for some years, and I saw the kids coming into college. We did these projects, and I would say, well, let's do this, then. And they go, how did you know that? I said, well, I learned that in high school. Didn't you? What did you learn in high school? And I think part of it, well, get my abridge my editorial. I think the dumbing down of some things is really not so good. But when the lights are turning on, Satan is becoming bound more and more. But finally, he will. And so this is a process. But what the Revelation 20 verse 4 is talking about, when the mediation begins, he's going to be shut away, have no influence on man. And when he deceives the nations again, just briefly, it's not going to be about what's right and wrong. Everybody's going to know. The deception will be, will there be any punishment if you go back to the old ways? Brother Russell's very specific on that.
Okay.
So I'll stop there.
Process underway.
Process underway.
Gotcha. All right. Brother David.
There are three possibilities. Possibility number
I love
one.
the way Brother David starts. Well, let me give you the possibility. That's awesome.
Here's the first proposition.
Go ahead.
That Satan is not bound in any way.
Okay.
All right. We have to reject that based upon Matthew 24, 42 through 44. Watch therefore.
24, 42 through 44?
Yep,
I just want to
42 through 44.
Okay.
Watch therefore, for ye know not what hour the Lord doth come. But know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched, and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. So this suggests that when our Lord returns, the good man of the house, and by it just means a householder, not a good man, this is Satan, wasn't expecting him, and it suggests that the Lord starts something at that point in time. So I think we can reject the first proposition, Satan is not bound in any way. Second proposition is that Satan is fully bound as a consequence of Jesus' return. Well, you go back to Revelation 20, and Brother Bob mentioned it just a moment ago. The purpose of the binding is that he should deceive the nations no more. If Satan is fully bound, do we see the nations no longer being deceived? No. They still are being deceived. Satan still has activity. So we can reject proposition 2. Proposition 3 is the binding is a process which began at the return of Jesus, will continue until the completion in the near future. Like Brother Harry, that appeals to me. And it does appear to be that was Brother Russell's thoughts on it. Here are 3 references. Reprint 1223. Brother Russell discusses the binding of Satan there. He says in the beginning of that, the binding of Satan could not begin until the angel had come down, 1874. So Brother Russell saw that process starting then. Reprint 4610. He discusses what the binding of Satan means in terms of restraining him in various ways, and he goes over that. Lastly, in the question book, page 625, the question is asked about it, and Brother Russell says there very briefly, I think that Satan is being bound. So Brother Russell, in his writings, looked at it as a process, and I think that is a reasonable conclusion based upon, we could illustrate the other 2 propositions couldn't possibly be true.
Okay, so being bound. All right, so we have a somewhat general consensus on that, somewhat a general consensus. It's just an interesting side note on this particular text. I'm not going to make a comment on it, but when it describes Satan, it describes the dragon, the serpent, who is the devil, and Satan. And that really does, I think, accentuate what all 3 of you brethren have said about a process, because you're seeing these different aspects of Satan's influence. Yes, Brother David.
Yeah, I didn't know how much to go into those details here just to answer the question. But when you look at those 4 different features of Satan, you see that these are 4 different roles that he plays in the deception of mankind. And just to come back to dragon for a minute, I've heard the thought recently from some brethren that the restraint more is in connection with the civil systems as opposed to Satan personally. Well, certainly since that's one of the four features that would seem to go, because the dragon represents civil government. And when we look at world history, especially since 1914, we see that it's not business as usual. Prior to that, it was the royal monarchies of Christendom that decided how things could go. That was Satan's magnum opus, was papacy. Do they have that power today? No, most of them don't exist, as we illustrated yesterday. So now we have different kinds of forms of government, democratic republics and things like this. This would appear to be one response of Satan to the restraint. Business isn't as usual, so let's go over here and see what we can do. The box gets a little bit closer. At least that's the perspective that appeals to me.
Okay, good. Fascinating. And brethren, more to study, and it's a thrilling thing to look at, whatever your conclusion may be, because the scriptures are very abundantly clear. So that he deceives the nation no longer. That's where we all stand up and cheer and say, however I see it coming, that's where it's going. And for us, brethren, let's remember that as we go through and discuss these things amongst ourselves and agree or disagree or agree to disagree, that we look at the end result and we can rejoice together in that. So I appreciate you, the brethren's focus on these things. Okay, a couple more questions. We'll see if we can get to a couple more questions. And these are a little bit more general. I was going to put them together. Well, I'm going to read the two questions and let's take them in two different pieces. When we say Jesus is present, where exactly is he? Did he come down from heaven to the spirit realm and is now confined to space? Okay, so that's the first thing. I'll leave the second question alone at this point. When we say Jesus is present, all right, where is he? Is he confined in his return? Any thoughts? Brother David.
I think we have a really nice scriptural answer to this question, very direct. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17. Then we that are alive, that are left, shall together with them be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. There's the answer to the question. Where's the Lord? He's in the air. He's in the vicinity of the earth. Should I go to the second question yet?
Well, yes, yeah, because those
right,
are
the confinement.
Yeah, those are both number 3 in our list.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, to my understanding, and this is getting into one of the other questions, but it relates to this, is that our Lord Jesus transferred his base of operations, his abode, if you will, when he returned in 1874. Can he travel back and forth to the spirit realm? Of course. There's no constraint or constriction of it. But when he was raised from the dead, his abode was in heaven at the right hand of the Father. But he came to earth once. Remember the Apostle Saul? He saw Jesus personally. Jesus wasn't in heaven at that point. He was on the road to Emmaus. So that tells us that even though his abode has been in heaven for the majority of the gospel age, he has the liberty to come to earth. We just have the one example of it, but certainly it gives the principle that Jesus has the freedom to go where he wants. Since he returned, the abode is in 1874 when he returns. Now his abode is in the vicinity of the earth, as the apostle says here, in the air. That's where his headquarters is. Very visible to Satan, to be sure. You know, going back to the householder, Satan sees where he is. Satan sees the raising of the sleeping saints, and I would imagine he's getting more and more frenetic about it. But anyway, the Lord is in the vicinity of the earth, in the air.
Okay, so there's an intruder in Satan's realm, is what
Yes,
you're saying,
that's right.
and he lives there. He set up his headquarters.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Brother Bob.
Yeah, when I looked at this question, I thought about Daniel 12:1, and it's kind of clear there. And at that time, Michael shall stand up. And this is, of course, there shall be a time of trouble. So it identifies the time frame. That standing up, if you look it up, it says he stands up. He's given his authority to now start acting. And so I think we all acknowledge that we are in this time of trouble, that it started back in that time frame. And there are 3 major things that are occurring right now that Jesus is the general over. The tearing down of the old systems. Watch the news, that's happening really well. That demolition's occurring right now before our eyes. The reestablishment of the nation of Israel, Why is that necessary? Because they are the blesser nation. If those bones weren't pulled back together, then they wouldn't be there at the start of the kingdom. The ancient worthies, what would they come back to transition to this new world order that we're seeing and the final sifting of the wheat? So he's been given authority to take charge and to accomplish these things. The question was interesting because it had some little nuance of is the Lord constrained? Like
is he stuck here?
He's not constrained. The evil spirits are constrained, but the Lord is not. I mean, as I think has already been said, he can come and go as he pleases to accomplish his purpose. But to my thinking, at that time, Michael shall stand up. He's given the scepter, he's given authority, and now he's starting to do the final demolition plan so that the kingdom can be set up.
Okay, so he is here, not constrained, and very much in agreement with the way Brother David approached it. Brother Harry.
Well, this is an interesting question. The chart behind us,
Several of them.
and right here too, this is what Little Pyramid R is. Now, Brother Russell didn't really explain Pyramid R in the chart chapter because he hadn't proven that the Lord had returned. But he's leaving plane K, which, by the way, is not the divine nature. This is the glory of office. He achieved the divine nature when he was resurrected on plane L, the plane of spirit birth. And when you look at the permission of evil, that is a necessary, very, very tough lesson for mankind to learn the wrong way to do everything. And it's also for us to test the church. But Jesus, he's in the glory of office with the Father on plane K, but in 1874 he returns. This is going to be his focus, because completing God's plan, completing the church, resurrecting the sleeping saints, calling the brethren out of Babylon, etc., and all the other features are going to take place. And I think this was a huge wake-up call when he returns, starts to break up the adversary's house. He's the goodman, sort of definitely not the goodman, but as Brother David was saying. But so he's returned. His focus is on completing all the features of God's plan, but the divine being is never constrained. He's doing this because he wants to. He knows God's plan, and he says, "This is my will to do my Father's will." However, all the lower spiritual creation, they can be constrained by a divine being with no problem. So it's all in harmony with God's plan.
All right, so we've put the scriptures in place that really show that he is here and that he is not constrained. And it's kind of like when there is a catastrophe, a trauma, you set up a triage center right there. You set up the temporary hospital. You move your headquarters to where the work needs to be done. Doesn't mean you have to stay there. And that, in the greatest way, is a very tiny example of Jesus returning and being present, literally being present. And I appreciated the verification by all of you, brethren, about the fact that, no, he's not constrained. The spirits, the evil spirits, they are, but he is not. There's a dramatic difference in what's happening in that. Let's go to the next question and this kind of overlaps on the previous question. So what exactly changed in 1874? And I think brethren have pretty much already begun to answer this. What exactly changed in 1874 about Jesus that now makes him present or returned? Was he not always present in spirit before 1874? Brother Bob?
Well, Brother Harry pretty much started with this when he showed the chart. Habakkuk 2, 2, and 3, we all are familiar with. And the Lord answered me and said, "Write the vision, make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it." So it was the right time for the increase of knowledge. It was the right time for the pastor to show on the scene, and right on time, they published the chart. Right on time. And so so now the vision is out there. Why did the Lord give the Laodicean church the vision? Because we needed it. It lays out his plan so we can see clearly the things that have passed, and we can also see in general the things that are yet to come. And that assurance, I think, is really necessary when we consecrate our lives to the Lord.
So the idea of, in relation to the question, what exactly changed in 1874, what you're saying is that we're given a clearer understanding because of his return of how and why. Okay, all right. Brother Harry, Brother David, go ahead.
In John 14:3, Jesus says, "If I go and prepare a place for you, I come again and will receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also." So this suggests very strongly, as do many other scriptures, that Jesus' return is a personal one. There's a personal presence involved. And I think that's important because we have heard the idea echoing around the movement, that the presence isn't so much a personal return, but it's a new phase in the way that he runs. I reject that idea. And I reject it because, if I tell you, I'm going to come to get you, but I'm going to stay over here, that doesn't make any sense. It means that I have to be with you personally to be able to do what I promised I would do, and that's what Jesus promised there. So the idea here of the difference between being present in spirit, and Matthew 18:20, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them, that's clearly a reference to his spiritual presence, his ability to know and be involved in what's going on during the whole gospel age without being personally present. He has that ability as a divine creature to be able to hear prayers and to watch what's going on. But clearly that was different. That's different from him being personally present. And I like the idea, just repeating myself, of he transferred his headquarters, his abode, from heaven, where he had been operating during the whole gospel age, to earth, because he wants to be on site. A general's got to be where the battle is. Yeah. You can't, I guess in this day of remote control and whatnot, that may not be as true as it used to be. But certainly in all of ancient times, when you're conducting a war, and this is a war, that you need to be on the site to be able to do that. And, I've got a talk I've been working on entitled, "What Have You Done For Me Lately?" And what I've been trying to do, and I've been fellowshipping with some of you on this, gathering information, what is it exactly that Jesus has done since 1874? You compile that list. And that is indicative that he's on the site. He's doing the job that he came to do. Anyway, that's it.
Okay, all right. We are getting a little bit shy on time. We've got technically we're like a minute. So, Brother Harry.
Well, I could just sort of say ditto. I appreciate the comments. Something like this is hard for the human mind to really comprehend, because there's so many things that the scriptures present in the context of human experience, which, so that we can have some capacity to see what's going on. It really seems, appreciate the comments, one of the main things is for the adversary to realize he is back. He's taking an active interest. I think of the scripture, I can't cite it, but it says, "You thought I was altogether one like you," because I kept silence and whatnot. But now, in another one, it says, "I'm going to do his work, his strange work." Well, all of a sudden, we're going to start undoing all this nasty, terrible, unrighteous mess. And when the Lord returns, lights are turning on, divine right of kings is gradually going to be going away, rights of man are going to be seen more and more. And the adversary and the fallen angels are seeing he is taking an active role. Now the church, he's always said, "I will never leave you, never forsake you." That's always been true. The promises have always been true. But now the enemies see, my word, he's back, he's here. And not only him, but after 1878,
My word, killing his followers apparently didn't work so
Yeah.
well.
And so what changed is essentially the headquarters and being involved in the actual dismantling of this world. And the way your brethren said it is very much like a war. And what didn't change is, lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age. The role that Jesus plays in the lives of the consecrated is exactly the same. It is not diminished. But what his role is very different, because he is piece by piece dismantling all that Satan has built and put in place. So we appreciate that. And brethren, it's 10:14. So Brother Rolando, we're going to pause here. There was couple of other questions, but we'll turn it back to you.